The Rochester Real Estate Show podcast. Jason Mancuso, the Anthony Butera team, joined today by Steve Bentavania. I love your text, cha-ching.
Probably put it on
Okay.
mute or something.
We're live, folks. We're live. Steve's been on this a bunch of times before. Long-time agent with us. Long time in the business. Always good to have his expertise. And today we are going to kind of address, continuing on, we've been doing a little series with, like confusing topics or topics that don't often get explained properly, in this business or in a transaction for a consumer, and just kind of diving in and providing some clarity around that. So today we picked deposit / down payment. And, the differences of that, the process of that, and how that relates to, somebody buying or selling a home these days. So,
Sure.
Two totally different things in terms of a deposit versus a down payment for a mortgage. A lot of people, I think it's worth bringing up because a lot of people get that confused and, think that their deposit that they're making after an accepted offer is the same as a down payment, vice versa. So
I find myself explaining that to buyers
yeah.
at least 50% of the time when we're going to write our first offer.
Well, listen, that's why we wanted to do what we're doing here with these sorts of topics. It's just because it's like, all right, we take it for granted a little bit at times where it's like, well, what is obvious for us just because we've been doing this for so long.
We do it every day.
In the trenches, right? Yeah. Is totally the opposite for most people. And, it's good. We always try to take a step back and make sure that every step of the process is explained properly. But, there are certain words like deposit and down payment that get taken for granted and
easily confused for
exactly.
one and the same.
Yeah, don't get us wrong. Everything gets explained once it gets brought up. But this is an effort to,
Sure.
watch this podcast before you get into the market,
Yeah.
so to speak. So, define technical definitions, earnest money deposit.
Yeah, so earnest money deposit is, just what it says, but like you said, it gets confused. So it's just a deposit that you put to, so to speak, hold the house, right? It gets held in escrow with the list broker, like the brokerage with the list agent.
Typically.
Typically, sometimes with attorneys or,
Yep.
or whatever in some unique situations. But so that'll get held, and that money goes towards your closing costs.
Right.
At the end, when you bring your check to closing, it's less the deposit that you've already given.
I think another good term for it is a good faith deposit, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Essentially, as a buyer, you're telling the seller, here's the money that you just accepted my offer. I'm going to start putting skin in the game just so that you aren't waiting for everything on closing day.
Sure.
And it's been interesting to see how this has evolved in the market that we've been in, that we've talked about for years now in the show, of being a seller's market and trying to placate the sellers as much as possible and make your offer strong. Like it used to be not too long ago, 4 or 5 years.
1%.
Yeah, general rule of thumb,
Right, yeah,
1%.
yeah.
So like $100,000 home, $1,000 deposit, totally normal. I mean, even less, $500 is like, okay, at that point, it's like, if you're a listing agent, you're telling the seller, like, okay, it's not a strong deposit. It just wasn't something that was really dug into too much.
Sure.
Fast forward, and the evolution over the last 5 years or so is showing Mr. and Mrs. Seller as a buyer, hey, I got skin in the game. I'm putting on a lot of money to secure this.
Yeah, we're not playing games.
Yeah,
we're putting a big chunk.
I'm not going to walk away in the 11th hour
Right.
versus only having $1,000 may lead, a buyer to, I guess, consider the risk of walking away less because, if you walk away as a buyer from a transaction, and you don't have any contingencies protecting you, your deposit is at risk.
For sure.
Right?
Yeah.
From
big,
there,
big difference from $1,000 and $25,000.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So it kind of, you're as a buyer with a bigger deposit, you're showing a seller, hey, I'm in. I'm not going to play any games when, I've got potentially, in that example, $25,000 to lose
Yeah.
versus 1,000, 500.
$1,000, something changed or
2,000
whatever
on
it
a
is.
$100,000 or
Yeah,
$200,000 purchase, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's been an evolution, and frankly, I think a good one, because I think, like you said, this deposit goes towards the cash that you're bringing to the table anyway to buy a house.
Doesn't cost the buyer any more
Yep.
in the long run to put a large deposit. It just shows we're not playing games. Like you said, we're not backing out at the 11th hour. And frankly, you shouldn't be writing an offer if you're not planning to move forward. So
Yeah.
I agree. I like the new standard, so to speak.
Yep. Now, don't get me wrong. There's a flip side of that coin to where, like, a deal dies and it's not the buyer's fault, and now you got this large deposit money tied up in escrow.
It could be tricky to get it released in a timely fashion.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. But I mean, essentially, those cases are usually resolved quicker than when the buyer, wants to bail for not having a contingency protecting them.
For sure.
So, important to note that money goes towards closing, as we said. Mm-hmm. So now shifting gears to down payment, two totally different things. Even though the deposit money can go towards the down payment, it's not the same. The down payment would be what?
The down payment is what you're putting towards the house with your mortgage. So if you're getting a 20% down mortgage and the property is $200,000, you're putting $40,000, essentially an equity into the loan.
Yep. So your total loan at that point would be for $160,000. Mm-hmm. You're buying the house for $200,000. You're putting $40,000 down on the loan to get to $160,000.
Yeah.
And there's this term that's thrown out a lot loosely, loan to value. Mm-hmm. Pretty easy to figure out in terms of, okay, 160 is the loan to the value of 200,000 in this example. So you would have an 80% loan to value. Mm-hmm. 80% is the loan, 20% is the down payment. There you go.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we were talking about with deposits, so in that scenario, you put $20,000 deposit.
Yep.
At closing, you're going to come up with the other $20,000 plus your closing costs and taxes. Yeah.
Yep. So that, I mean, in theory, you can have a deposit cover everything and show up to closing with zero.
Sure.
We've had that happen. I mean, it's more rare.
We're actually seeing it more common with cash guarantees and whatnot.
True. Yeah, it's more common now with the evolution of the market leading to higher deposits. Mm-hmm. And again, there's a flip side to every coin. Don't get me wrong. There is risk associated with going all in on a deposit, right?
For sure.
But that risk gets wiped off once there's, okay, we're closing. Mm-hmm. It's less of a check to cut or potentially no check if there's that big of a deposit that covers everything.
Sure.
I'm trying to think of it makes sense. It's it's confusing because you have, the deposit the deposit's due within 2 days of an accepted offer is the way the contract reads. So that gets cashed and that gets put, as you said, in typically the listing broker's escrow account and then gets distributed from there. I can understand why that gets misconstrued with down payment because it's almost like the down payment is the deposit, so to speak, on the mortgage.
On the mortgage, sure.
But
it comes up often.
Yeah, it does. But down payment is actually equity, right off the bat. If you're agreeing in that example we had, you're buying the house for $200,000, and
putting 20% down, you have $40,000 in equity. Right off the bat. Yeah. It's the equity you put into it, but it's still equity, right?
Starting with something.
Yeah, right.
What are we missing here?
I don't know. I think that covered most of it.
Deposits are refundable if you're protected by a contingency.
According to the contract, yes.
Right.
And they could be given personal check, wire transfer, money order.
Yep.
I've never seen anyone show up with 20 grand in a paper bag, but probably won't go well.
No, yeah.
It's not going to go well for your mortgage if you're getting a mortgage.
Well, yeah.
Either way.
That and brokerages and attorneys'
good luck
offices
having that happen.
typically don't take bags of cash. I think here's not to go negative, but like in the event there is a deal dying or dead and there's a dispute over a deposit, it gets tricky because brokerages' escrow accounts are a very heavily governed thing to where brokers can't just go taking money out of that.
No, they don't make the decision of the buyer gets a deposit back.
Yep, exactly. So essentially a buyer and seller and both brokerages representing the same have to sign off on what's called a cancellation and release of contract, in part of which releases the deposit back to the buyer, or if there's an agreement to where a seller is going to retain a deposit, that doesn't happen until the buyer and everybody signs off on it.
Yeah.
So you have to have written authorization to remove a deposit from an escrow account if it's not part of a closing.
Right. Otherwise, if no one agrees, it's court order. Right?
Yep. And this is where, okay, it comes down to go ahead and sue me, which by no means am I giving advice to go ahead and take on risk because of the probability of getting sued, whether it's likely or not. But it comes down to no matter who's right or who's wrong, until both parties sign off on something saying, hey, here's what we're agreeing to as part of this cancellation. I mean,
It's not getting released until you go to court.
There's, I know for a fact there's deposit money sitting in escrow accounts that's years, like
I can think of a few
8,
off the
10
top of my head,
years-
actually. Yeah.
10 years old that's just going to sit there until there's a cancellation signed by both parties.
Now, most of the time, it's because it's the buyer's fault, right? They backed out with no contingency. If there's contingencies, you have a pretty good case to know that this is a slam dunk in court. Why is the seller holding it up?
Yep.
Well, and then we can go down the road of,
Right.
we'll hold your property up.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, so like an example, if you have an inspection contingency, and no matter whether right or wrong in terms of the result and why a buyer's canceling the deal after that, there's still a contingency protecting that buyer. So, as a seller, you're not really going to have a leg to stand on. If a buyer's getting a mortgage, there's a contingency for that. They can't get approved or whatever the
they got
circumstances
denied, that's
are
it,
around not getting the mortgage, they're technically going to be protected. From there, like generally speaking, a mortgage contingency is typically the last contingency to a deal in terms of like chronological order. Assuming title is clean from the seller. From there, like there's not too much that's protecting a buyer other than the property being in the same condition that it was in.
Final walkthrough.
And title being clean. So if you're trying to bail on a deal after that as a buyer, that's where fights ensue typically. So, I think that's important to understand. Like this deposit money, like it's a very secure, regulated process that just can't get, the money can't get thrown around without mutual permission, so to speak.
Yeah, for sure.
Down payment side, to wrap that up, I mean, more involved with the banks because now you can, you got to look at like what makes sense for you financially to put down, do you go with something minimum or do you go 20% or more? It all
Depends on your situation, the
depends
house,
on your
everything.
situation. But I think this is meant to be kind of a short, quick hitter topic, just the base difference between deposit and down payment. Easily confused, but hopefully easily understandable from here.
Yeah, easily explained and easily understood.
There you go.
Typically. So.
Cool. All right, that's it for this one. Steve Pennsylvania joining us on the Rochester Real Estate Show podcast with the Anthony Butera team. Thanks for tuning in, guys.